Blackwood Manor. Chapter 1. The Arrival at the Precipice. The year was 1885, and a perpetual shroud seemed to cling to the English countryside, particularly the stretch leading to Blackwood Manor. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I carried with me little more than a modest trunk and a heart burdened by a quiet desperation. The advertisements for governess positions were plentiful, but the one from Lord Ashworth of Blackwood had stood out for its brevity and its surprisingly generous wage, a sum that hinted at either untold wealth or an unpalatable secret. The carriage, a lumbering, soot-stained vehicle, rattled its way up a winding, overgrown lane. The afternoon sky was a bruised purple, threatening rain, and the ancient oaks that lined the path seemed to twist their skeletal branches in welcome, or perhaps in warning. The air grew colder with each turn, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Finally, the manor appeared through a break in the trees, a hulking silhouette against the darkening sky. Blackwood Manor. It was a formidable structure of gray stone, its Gothic architecture exaggerated by the gloom. Turrets pierced the sky like accusing fingers, and countless windows, dark and vacant, stared out like dead eyes. A shiver, not entirely due to the cold, traced its way down my spine. The driver, a taciturn man with a perpetually grim expression, pulled the horses to a halt before a massive, oak-paneled door. He grunted, tossed my trunk onto the gravel, and without a word, turned the carriage around, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence. I lifted the heavy iron knocker, its dull clang echoing unnervingly in the vast stillness. After a long moment, the door creaked open, revealing a slender, severe woman in a starched black uniform. Her gray hair was pulled back with merciless precision, and her eyes, though discerning, held a weary sadness. This was Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, as promised in the correspondence. Miss Vance, I presume. Her voice was flat, devoid of warmth. Yes, Mrs. Gable, I am Eleanor Vance. She nodded curtly and stepped aside, allowing me entry. The interior of Blackwood Manor was as imposing as its exterior. A vast, echoing hall stretched before me, dimly lit by a single flickering gas lamp. The air here was heavy, thick with the scent of aged wood, dust, and something else, a faint, cloying sweetness, like faded roses. Shadows clung to every corner, dancing with the gaslight's erratic pulse. Tapestries depicting hunting scenes, now faded and frayed, adorned the walls, their figures seemingly watching my every move. Lord Ashworth is indisposed, Mrs. Gable informed me, her voice cutting through the silence. Lady Ashworth is confined to her rooms. You are expected to attend to Miss Clara immediately. Of course, I replied, feeling a strange tightening in my chest. Where might I find her? The nursery, on the 3rd floor. I shall show you to your chambers first. My room was small, tucked away at the end of a long, cold corridor. It was sparsely furnished. A narrow bed, a washstand, a small writing desk, and a single unadorned window that looked out onto a dreary, overgrown garden. The wallpaper, a faded floral pattern, peeled at the seams, and a persistent dampness permeated the air. As Mrs. Gable deposited my trunk and turned to leave, I noticed a slight tremor in her hands. "Mrs. Gable," I began, unable to resist. Is everything quite all right at Blackwood?" She paused, her back to me, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I heard a sigh. "Blackwood," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "has always been a quiet house, Miss Vance. Some might say too quiet." She then exited, closing the door softly behind her, leaving me in the echoing silence of Blackwood Manor, a silence that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. Chapter 2: Whispers in the Walls. My first few days at Blackwood Manor were a study in quiet desolation. Lord Ashworth was a terrifyingly remote figure, a man of sharp angles and colder eyes, who presided over the dinner table in grim silence. Lady Ashworth remained unseen, a phantom presence whose delicate health was cited by Mrs. Gable as the reason for her perpetual seclusion. My charge, Clara Ashworth, was a child of unsettling contrasts. She was 7 years old, with huge, luminous blue eyes that seemed to absorb all the light in a room. Her hair, the color of spun moonlight, fell in tangled waves around a face perpetually pale and drawn. She rarely spoke, preferring to communicate through her drawings, which were kept meticulously in a worn, leather-bound sketchbook. On my second afternoon, as the rain drizzled endlessly outside, I sat with Clara in the vast, drafty nursery. It was a room that felt utterly devoid of childish warmth, filled with archaic toys and a single, unlit fireplace. Clara was engrossed in her drawing. "What are you drawing today, Clara?" I asked gently, trying to coax a response. She didn't look up, her small hand moving deftly over the paper. "The lady," she murmured, her voice a reedy whisper. I leaned closer, curious. The drawing was of a woman, rendered in stark charcoal. She was beautiful, with long, flowing hair and a dress that seemed to ripple like water. But her eyes were wide, filled with an unbearable sorrow, and behind her, faint lines suggested a swirling mist. "Who is the lady, dear?" I pressed. Clara merely shrugged, a tiny, dismissive gesture. "She watches me sometimes," she said. A chill snaked up my spine. "Watches you from where?" Clara pointed vaguely towards the far corner of the nursery, where the shadows were deepest. "From there. She doesn't like Lord Ashworth." Before I could question her further, a sudden, jarring clang echoed from somewhere below, followed by a series of hurried footsteps. Clara flinched, dropping her charcoal stick, her eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" I asked, my own heart beginning to quicken. "It's nothing, Miss Vance," Mrs. Gable's voice, sharper than usual, called from the doorway. She stood there, her face a mask of grim composure, just a dropped pale. "The child is overwrought." Mrs. Gable then collected Clara and left, leaving me alone in the nursery, grappling with the strange encounter. Later that evening, as I retired to my room, the silence of the manor felt heavier than ever. I tried to read, but my mind kept returning to Clara's drawing, to the sadness in the lady's eyes. As the gaslight flickered, I distinctly heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, originating from just outside my door. It sounded like a woman's voice, sighing. I held my breath, straining to hear more. Nothing. Perhaps it was the wind, or the ancient timbers of the house settling. I told myself it was mere fatigue, the overwrought imaginings common to a new position. Yet, the air in my room felt suddenly colder, and the scent of faded roses, which I had first noticed in the main hall, now seemed to permeate my small chamber. I pulled my shawl tighter around me, a prickle of unease blossoming in my chest. Blackwood Manor was not merely quiet, it was intensely, profoundly silent, as if holding its breath, waiting. And I, Eleanor Vance, felt acutely that I had unknowingly walked into that silence, into something ancient and deeply troubled. Chapter 3. The Portrait and the Past. The whispers persisted, not always audible, but a felt presence, a cold breath on the nape of my neck, the distinct scent of roses, then gone. Clara grew increasingly withdrawn, her drawings now exclusively featuring the lady, her sorrowful eyes hauntingly rendered. Sometimes, Clara would hum a faint, melancholic tune, one I had never heard before, but which felt as ancient as the manor itself. My growing unease was compounded by Lord Ashworth's frostiness. He seemed to resent my very presence, his gaze often lingering on me with an unspoken suspicion. Lady Ashworth remained a recluse, a ghost within her own home. One blustery afternoon, seeking refuge from the persistent chill, I found myself drawn to the west wing, a part of the house Mrs. Gable had vaguely warned me away from as disused. The corridor was darker, the dust thicker, and the air heavier with the scent of decay. At the very end, almost hidden by a large, moth-eaten tapestry, I discovered a heavy, locked door. Intrigue, stronger than caution, stirred within me. I touched the cold, tarnished brass knob. It felt strangely charged, as if something vibrated behind it. Just then, a gust of wind howled through the manor, rattling the windows, and I distinctly heard a feminine sigh, closer this time, just behind my shoulder. I spun around, but there was nothing, only the dancing shadows. My heart hammered against my ribs, but a strange resolve settled over me. This locked door, this hidden room, felt significant. It seemed to be the heart of the manor's pervasive sadness. Days later, while searching for a particular book in the estate's vast, disorganized library, I stumbled upon a discarded, leather-bound album. The pages were yellowed, brittle, filled with sepia-toned photographs and miniature portraits. Near the back, almost forgotten, was a small, exquisitely painted miniature. It was the face of the woman Clara drew. Her name was handwritten beneath it in elegant script. Seraphina Ashworth. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with the same luminous blue eyes as Clara and a cascade of dark, rich hair. Her expression was one of vibrant intelligence, a playful spark in her eyes that defied the solemnity of the portrait. This was not the sorrowful lady of Clara's drawings, yet it was undeniably her. This Seraphina was full of life, not sorrow. What had happened to her? That night, as the wind howled like a banshee around Blackwood, I dreamt of Seraphina. She was standing in the very room I had found, the locked one in the west wing. Her vibrant laugh filled the air, then it faded, replaced by that same melancholic tune Clara hummed. Her eyes in the dream were like Clara's drawings, wide, sorrowful, begging. "He lied," she whispered, her voice like rustling leaves. "He lies." I woke with a gasp, the scent of roses suffocatingly strong in my small room. The gaslight had guttered out. In the utter darkness, a cold dread seized me. This was no dream. Seraphina was more than a forgotten portrait. She was here, in Blackwood, and she was trying to tell me something. And suddenly, my quiet desperation for a position had transformed into a pressing, terrifying need to understand. Chapter 4. The Diary of Despair. Driven by a relentless curiosity and an undeniable sense of purpose, I began to probe deeper. Mrs. Gable, initially reticent, eventually yielded fragments of information. "Lady Seraphina," she whispered one morning as we dusted the main hall, her voice barely audible, was Lord Ashworth's first wife. A spirit, she was, full of life. Not like poor Lady Ashworth now. "What happened to her?" I asked, my voice hushed. Mrs. Gable wrung her hands. "A wasting sickness," they said. "Took her suddenly, a year after little Clara was born. A tragedy." But her eyes, though downcast, held a knowing sadness that spoke volumes. My gaze drifted to the grand portrait hanging above the mantelpiece. A stern, unsmiling Lord Ashworth. He had married again so quickly after Seraphina's death. This felt wrong. My suspicions solidified into conviction when, during a particularly violent thunderstorm, the old manor's electricity failed, casting the entire house into a profound darkness. Lord Ashworth was away, and Mrs. Gable had retired for the night. Clutching a flickering kerosene lamp, I made my way to the west wing. The air there was thick with an anticipatory silence. I noticed a loose floorboard near the locked door, exposed by the dim light. Prying it open with an old letter opener, my fingers brushed against something hard and leather-bound. It was a small, dusty volume, its pages warped by damp. A diary. Seraphina Ashworth's diary. My heart pounded as I carried it back to my room, locking the door firmly behind me. The kerosene lamp cast dancing shadows as I began to read. Seraphina's elegant script filled the pages, chronicling her initial joy at marriage, her love for her husband, then a subtle, insidious shift. She described Lord Ashworth's growing possessiveness, his controlling nature. More alarmingly, she wrote of a persistent malaise, a constant fatigue, headaches, and a strange, metallic taste in her mouth. October 14th. The doctor assures me it is merely a weakness of the constitution, a common ailment for women after childbirth. But I feel as if I am fatting, a ghost already, inhabiting my own body. Robert insists on my taking this tonic for strength. November 2nd. The tonic makes me so tired. My hands shake and my thoughts drift. Robert grows impatient with my slowness, my inability to perform my duties. He watches me with those cold, assessing eyes. December 1st. I fear I do not have long. My strength ebbs with each passing day. My sweet Clara, who will protect her from her father's coldness. I see the fear in his eyes, not of my illness, but of something else, of me seeing through his carefully constructed lies. He gives me the tonic himself, insists I drink it all. I hear whispers, not from this world. They warn me. The last entry was dated December 10th, barely a year after Clara's birth. It was scrawled, almost illegible, stained with what looked like a dried tear. He is poisoning me, I know it, slowly, insidiously. The tonic, it is his weapon. He wants everything. My lands, my inheritance. He must not succeed. Clara must know. Find the cup, the silver cup in my chamber. The final word trailed off, unfinished. Poison. The word echoed in my mind, a chilling pronouncement of murder. Lord Ashworth, a murderer. And he had gotten away with it, disguising his heinous act as a natural illness. The diary slipped from my trembling fingers. The room grew impossibly cold. The scent of roses was overwhelming, accompanied by a sudden, faint shimmer in the air near the writing desk. A translucent hand, delicate and pale, briefly rested on the open diary, then vanished, leaving behind an intense, piercing chill. Seraphina was here. She had guided me to her truth, and she wanted me to act. Chapter 5. The Silver Cup and the Spectre's Plea. The revelations of Seraphina's diary weighed heavily upon me, transforming my fear into a grim determination. I now understood Clara's drawings, her melancholic tune, her terror. The child saw her mother's restless spirit, forever tethered to the house of her betrayal. My immediate focus was Seraphina's last, desperate plea. The silver cup in my chamber, her chamber, the locked room in the west wing. The next morning, under the guise of exploring the manor's architecture with Clara, I made my way back to the west wing. Clara, usually shy, seemed drawn to the locked door, her small hand reaching out to touch the cold wood. "Mama's room," she whispered, her eyes wide. "She waits for me." "Does she, dear?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Has she ever shown you how to open it?" Clara nodded, a solemn gesture. She led me to a carved wooden panel in the wall just beside the door, intricately decorated with vines and leaves. Her tiny finger traced a specific leaf, then pressed it. With a soft click, a small, hidden catch was released. The heavy door swung inward with a groan, revealing a room preserved in time. Seraphina's chamber was magnificent, yet heartbreaking in its stagnation. Heavy velvet curtains, now faded, blocked most of the light. A grand four-poster bed, its canopy draped in cobwebs, dominated the room. A dressing table held tarnished silver brushes and dried flowers. The air was thick with dust, and that persistent, sweet scent of old roses. As I stepped inside, the temperature plummeted. I felt a distinct pressure in the air, a sense of an invisible presence swirling around me. Clara, however, seemed at peace, her eyes wide with a serene understanding. "Mama," she whispered, reaching out into the empty air. I moved slowly, scanning the room for any sign of the cup. On a small side table beside the bed, amidst lace doilies and a half-finished embroidery project, sat a gleaming silver cup. It was exquisitely chased with delicate floral patterns. Even in the gloom, it gleamed. As I reached for it, a sudden, powerful surge of cold enveloped my hand. The cup felt icy, not just from disuse, but with an unnatural, profound chill. A whisper, clear and distinct this time, resonated directly in my mind. "Look closer." I turned the cup over. Engraved on its base, almost imperceptible beneath decades of tarnish, was a tiny, faded inscription. S.A., a gift of love, R.A., and then, even smaller, a nearly invisible scratch. I lifted it closer to the weak light filtering through the dust-laden curtains. My breath hitched. Beneath the inscription, etched almost deliberately, were 3-minute, almost microscopic holes, barely visible to the naked eye. They were too perfect to be accidental, too small to be noticed by a casual glance. But in conjunction with Seraphina's final, desperate words, their purpose became horrifyingly clear. This was no ordinary cup. This was a vessel of slow murder. The tonic, administered by Lord Ashworth, could have been poured into it. The poison added through these tiny holes, undetectable to the victim. Just as this horrifying realization solidified, the air in the room shimmered violently. A translucent form began to coalesce at the foot of the bed. It was Seraphina, her form sorrowful but distinct, her long hair flowing, her eyes fixed on me with an intense plea. She was no longer just a whisper or a fleeting shadow. She was here, pleading for justice. She raised a spectral hand, pointing not at me, but towards a heavy oak armoire in the corner. Her presence was cold, utterly desolate, yet infused with a powerful, unspoken imperative. She wanted me to find something else, something in the armoire. My heart pounded, but I felt no fear, only a profound empathy for this wronged spirit. Seraphina had suffered, and now I was her hope for peace. Chapter 6. The Unmasking. With Seraphina's spectral gaze fixed upon me, I moved towards the armoire, Clara trailing behind me, her small hand clutching my skirt. The heavy doors swung open with a creak, revealing a cavernous interior largely filled with moth-eaten gowns and discarded personal effects. But the ghost's finger pointed to a small, locked wooden box tucked away on a high shelf. Retrieving it, I found it locked. But Seraphina's hand clear as day, moved to the dressing table, where nestled amongst dried rose petals was a delicate silver key. It was a perfect fit. Inside the box lay a collection of letters, tied with a faded ribbon. They were exchanges between Seraphina and a renowned toxicologist in London, a Dr. Alastair Finch. The dates spanned the period of Seraphina's illness. The letters detailed Seraphina's growing suspicions about Lord Ashworth's tonic. She had, with immense difficulty, smuggled out samples of the concoction, along with a lock of her own hair. Dr. Finch's responses were increasingly alarming. February 5th, 1885. My dear Lady Ashworth, the sample you provided is indeed concerning. It contains traces of arsenic, though in quantities too small to be immediately fatal. However, prolonged exposure would undoubtedly lead to a slow and agonizing decline, mimicking a natural wasting sickness. This is a highly sophisticated, insidious method. I implore you to seek immediate aid. Is there someone at Blackwood you can trust? The final letter, dated just days before her death, was brief and urgent. Lady Ashworth, I have received the hair sample. The levels of arsenic are alarmingly high. Your life is in extreme peril. I have dispatched a private investigator to Blackwood, but I fear he may be too late to prevent. The letter ended abruptly. The investigator likely never reached her or was intercepted. Lord Ashworth had been meticulous. Just as I finished reading the last letter, the door to Seraphina's chamber burst open. Lord Ashworth stood framed in the doorway, his gaunt face contorted with rage. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, now burned with a chilling fury. "What are you doing in here?" he snarled, his voice a low growl. He strode into the room, his gaze falling upon the silver cup, the letters, the open diary. His eyes widened, a flicker of genuine fear crossing his face as he saw the evidence of his crime laid bare. "I know, Lord Ashworth," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I know what you did to Seraphina." He moved towards me, his hand reaching out, not to reason, but to silence. "You meddling fool, you know nothing. This is madness. My wife died of illness, as everyone knows." But as he advanced, the presence of Seraphina intensified. The temperature in the room plummeted to an unbearable cold. The air shimmered, and then, slowly, horrifyingly, Seraphina's transparent form materialized directly in front of him, blocking his path. She was not the sorrowful, pleading ghost now. Her eyes burned with a righteous fury, her spectral hand raised, pointing a silent, accusing finger at him. Lord Ashworth froze, his bloodshot eyes fixed on the apparition. A guttural cry escaped his lips, a raw, primal sound of terror. He staggered backward, his face paling to an ashen gray. He could see her. She was undeniable. "No, no," he whimpered, stumbling over his words, his bravado utterly shattered. "It's a trick, a devil's trick." But it was no trick. Seraphina's form pulsed with an ethereal light. her silent accusation echoing in the very fabric of the room. Clara, witnessing her mother's terrifying appearance to her father, let out a small, whimpering cry, clutching my hand tighter. "You poisoned me," Seraphina's voice, though not heard by my ears, but felt in my very soul, resonated with chilling clarity. "For greed, for Blackwood, and you thought to bury my truth with my body." Lord Ashworth collapsed onto the floor, a broken man, his screams of terror echoing through the silent, ancient walls of Blackwood Manor. Chapter 7. Justice and Departure. Lord Ashworth's screams brought Mrs. Gable and a few other awakened servants to Seraphina's chamber. They found him cowering on the floor, babbling incoherently about her and the devil. The sight of him, a man usually so composed and stern, reduced to a whimpering wreck, confirmed to Mrs. Gable, at least, that something profoundly unnatural had transpired. I calmly presented the evidence: Seraphina's diary, the letters from Dr. Finch, the silver cup with its telltale holes. Mrs. Gable's face, usually so impassive, crumpled in an expression of profound sorrow and recognition. She had suspected, she later confessed, but had been powerless to act. A local constable, summoned with haste, was initially skeptical. But the sheer volume of evidence, coupled with Lord Ashworth's terrified, rambling confession, blurted out in a desperate attempt to explain what he had seen, proved undeniable. Dr. Finch's final, desperate letter arrived the very next day, having been delayed by a postal strike, detailing the dispatch of the investigator and confirming the insidious nature of the arsenic poisoning. The current Lady Ashworth, a woman broken by her life in Blackwood, and now suddenly free, confirmed her husband's suspicious behavior and his strange medications for Seraphina. Lord Ashworth was arrested and led away from Blackwood Manor, his spirit utterly broken. The grand, imposing house, which had once felt like a tomb, now seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. That evening, after Clara had fallen into a deep, peaceful sleep, no longer plagued by her mother's sorrowful presence, I returned to Seraphina's chamber. The air, though still cool, no longer held the same oppressive chill. The scent of roses lingered, but it was softer, sweeter, not cloying. Seraphina's spectral form appeared one last time, standing by the window. Her eyes, once filled with sorrow and fury, now held a profound peace. She offered a gentle, ethereal smile, a silent gesture of gratitude. Beside her, a faint, shimmery outline of a man, likely the ill-fated investigator she had mentioned, seemed to nod in approval. "Thank you, Seraphina," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. "You can rest now." Her form shimmered, growing more translucent, as if dissolving into the very light. The scent of roses intensified for a moment, then softly faded. And then she was gone, truly gone. The room, for the first time in years, felt empty of her sorrowful presence, filled instead with a quiet, sacred calm. Chapter 8. The Dawn over Blackwood. In the aftermath, Blackwood Manor slowly began to shed its pall of sorrow. Lord Ashworth was convicted of Seraphina's murder, the scandal reverberating through the country's upper echelons. Lady Ashworth, freed from her oppressive marriage, decided to leave the manor, seeking solace with distant relatives and a chance at healing. Clara, my sweet, sensitive Clara, was spared the full horror of the ordeal. With her father imprisoned and her mother's spirit at peace, the fear slowly began to recede from her eyes. She started to speak more, to laugh with the innocent joy of a child. Her drawings, though still beautiful, no longer featured the sad lady, but instead depicted bright, sunlit gardens and playful animals. Eleanor Vance remained at Blackwood for a time, helping Clara navigate her new world. I had arrived a desperate governess, seeking mere employment. I left having uncovered a murder, brought justice to a wronged spirit, and found an unexpected connection with a child in need. The great manor eventually went up for sale. Its dark history, however, ensured that it remained on the market for years, a silent testament to the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. I often wondered if the echoes of Seraphina's story still lingered in the drafts and whispers, a solemn warning to any who would enter with ill intent. I never forgot Blackwood Manor, nor the ghost who had guided me through its shadowed corridors. The experience had forged something new within me, a quiet strength, a deeper understanding of the unseen world, and a profound conviction that some truths, no matter how deeply buried, will always find a way to surface, helped along by the tireless whispers of the restless dead. I took Clara with me when I eventually left Blackwood. We traveled to a small cottage by the sea, a place where the sun always shone and the ocean breezes carried away the last vestiges of fear and sorrow. In the gentle rhythm of the waves, and in Clara's growing smiles, I found my own peace, a quiet dawn after the long, dark night of Blackwood Manor. And sometimes, in the soft scent of an unexpected rose, I felt a gentle presence, a reminder that even in the darkest of places, justice and peace can eventually bloom.